Welcome back everybody to another one in my aviation history series, and this is going to be episode 47 on the history of the RCAF. Now in today's video we look at 444 Squadron, which sort of begins a new chapter in my look at these squadrons, as 444 Squadron is the first RCAF unit to be formed in the post-war years that did not have any World War II history. It only began in the post-war years. So it's kind of cool. We're getting closer and closer to the end of the 400 series squadrons. So as I said last video, need some ideas for the next couple of videos coming up after that. But as always, before we get too far into this, my name is Sean, and this is Sean's Aviation. 444 Squadron was initially formed as an Air Observation Post Unit, or an AOP unit, on October 1st of 1947. They were located at the Canadian Joint Air Training Centre based at Rivers, Manitoba, and flew Chipmunks and Osters. Their main role was training Army pilots and ranging and directing artillery fire, as well as light forward reconnaissance, something that was later taken over by helicopters in the late 1950s and is now fulfilled by drones in the modern battlefield. While the unit was an RCAF unit, it was commanded by an Army Major and Army Instructor pilots, but with an RCAF Chief Flight Instructor and an RCAF ground personnel. Of particular note, 444 Squadron was the first unit in the RCAF to operate a helicopter when it evaluated a Sikorsky S-51. In 1949, it was decided to transfer this role to the Light Aircraft School, and as such, the unit disbanded on April 1st of 1949. It was then reformed on March 1st of 1953 as a fighter unit located at St. Hubert and was given the unit identifier VH. It was equipped with Sabre Mark IVs, and after a brief few months training, it was transferred to Europe as part of the RCAF's commitment to NATO. It flew overseas as part of Operation Leapfrog 4, and you can see a link to my video on Operation Leapfrog above. Now, it arrived at its new base, RCAF Station Bad Solingen, as part of 4-Wing, and was ready for operations by September 4th of 1953. As with most RCAF Sabre units in Europe, 444 participated in intense training, as well as a number of goodwill visits around various European allies. In February of 1954, the unit upgraded to the Sabre Mark V, and then again to the Sabre Mark VI in April of 1955. In 1963, it was decided that 444 Squadron would re-equip with the new CF-104. As such, the unit was disbanded on March 1st of 1963 and then reactivated on May 27th as a strike attack unit still based at Bad Solingen. The unit did not operate for long, although, as it was disbanded just short 4 years later on April 1st of 1967, when the number of CF-104 units in Europe was reduced down to 6. Now, 444 Squadron was once again stood up in 1972 when it took over the personnel and equipment of the RCAC helicopter troop as the RCHA AOP troop. Now, tangent story, the RCAC was the Royal Canadian Armoured Corps, and the helicopter troop was formed in 1961 at Rivers, Manitoba to operate the CH-112 Nomad helicopter in the forward reconnaissance role, the same role 444 Squadron used to fulfill with the Chipmunks and Osters in the late 1940s. The one RCHA AOP troop was the Air Observation Post unit for the 1st Royal Canadian Horse Artillery, which fulfilled the same role as the above. Now, both of these Army units were combined, and in the post-unification world, became the Air Force unit 444 Squadron, almost a full circle to where 444 was 25 years prior. Now, the use of the CH-112 Nomad did not last long, and by the end of 1972, the unit had converted to the CH-136 Kiowa. With these, they provided forward reconnaissance, artillery spotting, medevac, light transport, and communications missions for the Canadian Army units posted throughout Europe. Now, many Canadian Army members have fond memories of 444 Squadron Kiowas flying overhead during exercises. Now, with the drawdown of Canadian forces in Europe, 444 Squadron was once again stood down in 1991. 444 Squadron was not done, however, and it had another lease on life when it was stood back up in 1993 at CFB Goose Bay as a combat support unit flying the CH-135 Twin Huey. They were painted in the SAR scheme of yellow and red and were used as a rapid response for military flight operations and exercises in the Goose Bay and larger Labrador areas. In 1996, the unit converted from the CH-135 to the CH-146 Griffin helicopter. So as you can see, 444 Squadron has had kind of an on-again, off-again history, and I think a lot of that ties directly to the fact that it had no World War II legacy. It was, other than the few years it existed as a fighter unit, its only real job was smaller, less flashier roles, and I think that's because the flashier ones, the fighters, all that kind of stuff, the maritime patrol, the transport, they went to units that had a history in World War II doing that job. So 444 is kind of one of the ancillary numbers that gets used up when all the other unit numbers have been used. Now 444 Squadron continues to operate out of Goose Bay and continues to fly the CH-146 Griffin in the combat search and rescue role. And it's a relatively small squadron. It only has 3 airframes and associated air crew and ground crew, and it's made up of both regular force, reservists, as well as civilian members. So it's a really small, tight-knit unit. And as I said, with the when the unit was first formed, it still does some civilian search and rescue on an as-needed basis. Now, the Griffin doesn't have the greatest of ranges, and the area out there is vast and mostly wilderness, so it doesn't have the ability to do too much, but it will help out as needed when called upon in a pinch. So it is a very well-known squadron in the area and very integrated, like as I said, tight-knit with the community. So I don't see that number going away anytime soon, unless they move it to a higher number, but I see them keeping, or the lower numbers, I see them keeping those numbers, as I mentioned in previous videos, for when new fighter units come online. We've got new aircraft, new drone units, more stuff coming online that we didn't have in the past, and I think those World War II legacy units will continue taking those numbers, and 444 should continue to be used in the existing role out on the East Coast. So I'm going to wrap it up here. So thank you all for watching. We'll see you all next time.